My name isn't on any headstone, but I died once. And if you're hearing this, then maybe they finally found out. I stand at the tomb of the unknown soldier, hands buried deep in my coat pockets, watching families trace names carved into black granite. A mother presses her palm against cold stone. A child leaves a small American flag by a wreath. They all have someone to mourn, someone whose sacrifice has a face, a story, a place to rest. I don't. Behind me, the crowd moves in respectful silence. Tourists snap photos. Veterans salute with weathered hands. I remain still, just another woman in civilian clothes, paying her respects. Invisible. The way I've always been. That's when I see him. An older man in a worn navy jacket, silver hair catching the afternoon sun. His eyes sweep the memorial wall, then stop. On me. His face changes, recognition dawning like sunrise over desert sand. He takes a step forward, then another. The crowd seems to part around him as he approaches. When he's close enough that I can see the faded anchor tattoo on his wrist, he speaks. Wait. You're the ghost unit's survivor. The words hit the air like a gunshot. Conversations stop mid-sentence. A woman drops her water bottle. The sound echoes against the memorial stones. I don't move. Don't breathe. 20 years of hiding, of being erased, of letting my family believe I couldn't hack it, all of it, hanging in the silence between his question and my answer. Behind him, more heads turn. A young Marine's eyes widen. An army captain steps closer, studying my face, like he's trying to place a photograph from a classified briefing. My mother, who came with me today, who told me not to make a scene, goes pale as winter sky. Her purse slips from her hands, contents scattering across the walkway. I look at the veteran. His eyes are kind, but certain. He knows. Somehow, after all these years, someone finally knows. I nod once. Simple, silent. The crowd goes completely still. My name is Jordan Blake. I'm the only daughter in a military dynasty, a former naval intelligence officer, and according to my family, someone who couldn't hack it. They told everyone I failed. At West Point, in the service, at life. But that wasn't the truth. Not even close. For 20 years, I've watched my brother collect medals for missions he's never run. I've sat through family dinners where my name isn't mentioned. I've been cropped out of photographs and edited out of stories until I became a ghost in my own life. But ghosts have a way of coming back. If you've ever been erased by your own blood, if you've ever been invisible in your own home, if you've ever had your truth buried so deep you started to doubt it yourself. Stay with me, because sometimes the loudest thing you can do is finally stop being quiet. The recognition at the memorial wasn't magic. It was memory finally catching up to silence. 3 months into my final year at West Point, I thought I knew exactly how my story would end. Graduation in May, commission as a second lieutenant assignment to naval intelligence. My father would pin my bars. My mother would cry the proud kind of tears. My brother would shake my hand like an equal for the first time. I was wrong about all of it. February 2003, a training exercise in Turkey that wasn't supposed to be training at all. 4 CIA operatives had gone dark during a surveillance operation in Ankara. Official channels were compromised. The Turkish government couldn't know we were there. I was part of a 12-person cultural exchange team, cadets, supposedly studying NATO cooperation protocols. What we were really doing was providing cover for an extraction that didn't officially exist. The operation went sideways before we even landed. Our contact at the embassy was feeding information to hostile elements. The safe house had been burned. The operatives were trapped in a basement beneath a textile factory, surrounded by local militia who thought they were arms dealers. Standard protocol called for immediate withdrawal. Abort mission, evacuate personnel, file a clean report claiming the exchange program encountered scheduling conflicts. I made a different call. While my team leader radioed for extraction orders, I slipped out through the hotel's service entrance. No backup, no communication, no official authorization. I had studied the city layout for weeks, memorized traffic patterns, identified 3 separate exit routes. The textile factory sat in a maze of narrow streets, designed to confuse invaders centuries before GPS existed. I found the militia's lookout positions, 2 men on the roof, one at the front entrance, another monitoring the alley. They were watching for a coordinated assault, not a single person with a tourist camera and a college backpack. I didn't have weapons. I had something better, the ability to become wallpaper. For 6 hours, I mapped their rotations, counted their ammunition, noted when they ate, when they relaxed, when they checked their phones. At 2 a.m., when the guard rotation was thinnest, I triggered a small electrical fire in the building across the street. Nothing dangerous, just enough smoke to draw 2 of them away. While they investigated, I slipped through a drainage grate that led directly under the factory floor. The 4 operatives were alive but barely. 2 had been beaten. 1 had a broken wrist. All of them were scheduled for transport to a detention facility at sunrise, which meant they had maybe 3 hours before this became an international incident. I gave them my phone and told them to call for extraction in exactly 40 minutes. Then I went back up to create a distraction. What I did next isn't in any official report. It never will be. I walked through the front door of that factory and told the militia leader I was a journalist investigating human trafficking routes. I showed him my camera, my press credentials forged, but convincing. I asked if I could interview him about border security. For 30 minutes, I sat across from a man holding an AK-47 and discussed regional politics while 4 American operatives crawled through sewage pipes toward freedom. I laughed at his jokes. I took his photograph. I promised to send him copies when my article was published. When the extraction helicopter appeared over the horizon, I excused myself to use the bathroom and slipped out the same drainage grate I'd used before. The operatives made it out. The militia never knew they'd been rescued. The Turkish government filed a report about a small electrical fire that required no investigation. I returned to West Point with the rest of my class, carrying a camera full of tourist photos and a story I could never tell. 2 weeks later, I was called to the commandant's office. The man sitting across from me wasn't military. No uniform, no insignia, just a quiet intensity that made the air feel heavier. He knew about Turkey, not the official version, the real one. "Cadet Blake," he said, sliding a thin folder across the desk. "How would you feel about graduation being postponed?" Inside the folder was a single sheet of paper. Operation Ghost Unit, Tier 1 classified. Personnel recruited based on demonstrated capacity for autonomous decision-making in hostile environments. He called it non-linear tactical acuity. I called it being too stubborn to quit when quitting made sense. "If you accept," he continued, "your records will show that you left West Point due to academic pressure. Your family will be told you couldn't handle the stress. There will be no ceremony, no commission, no explanation." I stared at the paper. Everything I'd worked for, everything my family expected, reduced to a lie that would follow me forever. "What happens to Jordan Blake?" I asked. "She disappears," he said. "Completely." I signed the papers that afternoon. My father was told I'd suffered a breakdown during finals week. My mother received a call explaining that some cadets simply weren't built for military life. My brother was assured that these things happened, that not everyone could carry the family tradition. None of them questioned it. Maybe they even believed it made sense that the daughter who'd always been a little too independent, a little too willing to break rules, would finally break herself. I packed my personal belongings into 2 boxes, left my textbooks on the desk, walked out of West Point without a backward glance. Jordan Blake, the cadet who couldn't hack it, ceased to exist that day. The woman who took her place had no name, no rank, no family who would claim her. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. Disappearing from the world is easier than disappearing from a family that's already learned to look through you. Christmas 2004, my first holiday as a ghost. I sat in my rental car outside my childhood home in Colorado Springs, watching warm light spill from windows I'd once pressed my face against as a child. Through the dining room window, I could see them gathered around the table, my parents, my brother Marcus, his new wife Sarah, and my younger sister Emma, home from her sophomore year at the Naval Academy. 5 place settings, 5 chairs, 5 lives moving forward without the space I used to occupy. I'd been in Damascus for 3 months, running surveillance on arms dealers who funneled weapons to insurgent cells. The mission had no official end date, no extraction timeline. I existed in hotel rooms and safe houses, communicating through encrypted channels with handlers who knew me only as Saber. But I was still their daughter, still their sister. The part of me that remembered birthday cakes and Christmas stockings had driven 12 hours from the nearest airport, hoping maybe this year would be different. It wasn't. Through the window, I watched Marcus carve the turkey. He wore his dress uniform, crisp blue fabric adorned with ribbons I recognized from his service in Afghanistan. Sarah hung on his every word as he described his latest deployment. Emma leaned forward, studying his medals like scripture. My mother brought out dessert, beaming with the kind of pride that radiates from deep in the chest. When someone asked about family traditions, my father launched into stories about military service spanning 3 generations. Blake men and women who'd served with honor, who'd made sacrifices for their country. Not once did anyone mention the daughter who'd left West Point in shame. I drove back to Denver that night and flew to Turkey the next morning. It would be 18 months before I came home again. By then, Marcus had published a book. Beyond the Wire leadership lessons from the front lines, hit military reading lists and veteran book clubs across the country. The author photo showed him in combat gear jaw, set with quiet determination. The back cover quoted praise from generals and senators. I bought a copy at an airport bookstore in Frankfurt, reading it during a layover between missions. The stories were good, honest accounts of leading soldiers through impossible situations, making life and death decisions with incomplete information, finding courage when fear made more sense. In Chapter 7, he wrote about the weight of command, the responsibility of bringing everyone home alive. He described a firefight outside Kandahar, where split-second decisions saved his entire unit. The prose was clean, powerful, real. I recognized every detail. Not because I'd been there, but because I'd written the after-action report, the classified version filed under a different operation name, stamped with security clearances Marcus had never held. Someone had given him access to my mission files. Someone had let him mine my war for his book deal. I closed the cover and stared at his photograph, my brother the war hero, the family success story, the Blake child who'd made something of himself. 3 weeks later, I was home for Emma's commissioning ceremony. "Don't wear anything too militaristic," my mother said, when I called to confirm I was coming. "This is Emma's day. We don't want any distractions." I showed up in a simple black dress and low heels. No insignia, no ribbons, nothing that might suggest I'd ever served anywhere more dangerous than a desk job. I sat in the back row of the chapel, hands folded, watching my little sister receive her gold bars from our father. The ceremony was beautiful. Emma looked radiant, proud, ready to carry forward the family tradition. During the reception, people asked about her plans, her assignments, her future in the Navy. When someone mentioned that Marcus had a sister too, my mother would smile and say, "Jordan works in consulting now. Nothing too exciting." Consulting. As if 20 years of classified operations could be reduced to PowerPoint presentations and conference calls. That night I stood in Emma's childhood bedroom, looking at the walls, covered with ribbons from track meets and debate tournaments, photos of family vacations, school dances, graduation ceremonies, an entire life documented in careful detail. I searched for my own face in those photographs, found myself cropped out of 3, replaced by cousins and 2 others. In the remaining pictures, I was there, but barely standing at the edge of groups, looking away from the camera, already fading before I'd even disappeared. Syria changed everything. October 2007. My team was running a deep reconnaissance mission near Aleppo, tracking a high-value target who'd been coordinating attacks on coalition forces. 3 months of surveillance had finally positioned us for capture. The ambush came from nowhere. Sniper fire from elevated positions, coordinated assault from multiple angles. Professional plan, precisely executed. Someone had sold us out. I managed to reach our emergency communication point, a reinforced bunker, 2 clicks from the kill zone. My team was pinned down, taking casualties, running low on ammunition. I had maybe 10 minutes before our position was overrun. I sent the distress signal using our highest priority encryption. Code red, emergency extraction. GPS coordinates. Casualty count, request for immediate air support, and waited. No response, no acknowledgement, no rescue birds on the horizon. I sent the signal again, then again. Each time the system confirmed delivery to our command center. Each time silence. We held that position for 6 hours, lost 2 good people before a patrol from a different unit stumbled across us and called in support. By then, the high-value target was long gone, and our mission was compromised beyond recovery. The after-action report listed our distress signal as never received due to equipment malfunction. Case closed. Operational failure attributed to technological breakdown, but I knew better. 2 years later, during a routine security audit, I requested access to our communication logs from that mission. Buried in the metadata, I found the delivery confirmation. Our distress signal had been received, opened, and marked as read. The terminal ID that accessed it traced back to Presbyterian Hospital in Denver, my mother's workplace. Her security clearance from her Army medic days had never been fully revoked, a bureaucratic oversight that gave her limited access to certain military communication networks. Someone had used her credentials to monitor our classified channels. Someone had been watching our operations, waiting for the right moment to let us fall. I stared at that terminal ID for hours, trying to make it mean something else. Maybe she'd accidentally accessed the wrong system. Maybe someone had stolen her login information. Maybe it was all just a terrible coincidence. But I remembered Christmas dinner, the empty chair at their table, the way they'd learned to tell family stories without mentioning my name. I remembered Marcus's book filled with details from my classified missions. I remembered my mother's careful words, nothing too exciting. For the first time since joining Ghost Unit, I wondered if my family's indifference hadn't been disappointment at all. Maybe it had been strategy. Maybe the daughter who couldn't hack it wasn't supposed to survive her failures. Maybe someone had been making sure I didn't. The invitation arrived on Department of Veterans Affairs letterhead forwarded through 3 different addresses before reaching my secure mailbox in Vienna. Marcus Blake would be the keynote speaker at the Colorado Springs Veterans Day ceremony, a decorated officer sharing stories of courage and sacrifice. I was between missions officially on administrative leave, while my security clearance underwent routine renewal. 3 weeks in the mountains seemed like exactly what I needed: quiet time to process what I'd discovered about my mother's terminal access space, to think through the implications without the constant pressure of operational security. I didn't plan to attend the ceremony, but November 11th found me sitting in my rental car outside the Civic Center, watching veterans file through the doors in their dress uniforms and service caps. Old men leaning on canes, middle-aged women with purple heart pins, young soldiers fresh from Iraq and Afghanistan. I wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, a navy blazer, nothing that would draw attention. Just another face in the crowd of family members and supporters. The auditorium was packed. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the stage. A color guard stood at attention as the national anthem played. I found a seat in the back beside an elderly woman clutching a photograph of a young Marine. Marcus took the stage to thunderous applause. 4 years had aged him well silver, threading through his dark hairlines around his eyes that spoke of responsibility and command. His uniform was immaculate ribbons, arranged with mathematical precision. Today, we honor those who served, he began, voice carrying easily through the speakers. But more than that, we honor the choices they made when facing the impossible. He spoke about leadership, about sacrifice, about the weight of decisions made in darkness. The crowd hung on every word. When he described the loneliness of command heads, nodded throughout the auditorium. When he talked about bringing soldiers home, I saw tears in several eyes. Then he shifted gears. I want to share with you a story that exemplifies the best of American military service, Marcus said, pulling out a single sheet of paper. This comes from a recently declassified document detailing operations in the Middle East. The details have been redacted, but the essence remains. My chest tightened. An intelligence officer serving in a combat zone received credible intelligence about an imminent attack on a refugee camp housing over 300 civilians. Marcus continued. Standard protocol called for reporting the threat through official channels and waiting for coordinated response. I gripped the arms of my chair. Instead, this officer made the decision to act immediately. Using local assets and personal contacts developed over months of cultivation, they initiated an unauthorized evacuation operation. Working through the night, they moved civilians to safety, while maintaining the appearance of normal camp operations. The auditorium was completely silent. The attack came at dawn exactly as predicted. Insurgent forces overran the camp, finding it empty except for a handful of guards who'd volunteered to stay behind to maintain the deception. The operation saved 317 lives. Applause began slowly, then built to a standing ovation. I remained seated staring at my brother as he basked in appreciation for courage that wasn't his. The officer's name is redacted from all reports, Marcus said as the applause died down. Their service remains classified. But their choice to act when action was required to risk everything for people they'd never met represents the highest ideals of military service. More applause. The elderly woman beside me wiped tears from her eyes. "God bless them," she whispered. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to walk to that podium and tell them all that the anonymous hero was sitting right there, that the classified operation had cost me 18 months of investigation and nearly ended my career, that the local assets were children I'd taught English to while establishing my cover. I wanted to tell them that the decision hadn't felt heroic at all, just necessary. That I'd spent 3 sleepless nights afterward, wondering if I'd compromised other operations, endangered other lives, overstepped my authority in ways that could haunt future missions. I wanted to tell them that the refugee camp was real, that the children had faces and names, that some of them had drawn pictures for me in broken English saying, "Thank you, American lady." Instead, I sat in silence while my brother concluded his speech with quotes about duty and honor. I watched the crowd give him another standing ovation. I listened as people congratulated him afterward, praising his service, thanking him for sharing such inspiring stories. He graciously accepted their thanks, never claiming the story was his own, but never correcting their assumption that he'd witnessed such heroism firsthand. The line between sharing a story and claiming credit blurred in the warm glow of appreciation. Later at the reception, I stood near the coffee table, watching Marcus shake hands and pose for photographs. A young soldier approached him, eyes bright with admiration. "Sir, that story about the refugee camp, do you think that officer ever got recognized for what they did?" Marcus paused, considering the question with the thoughtful expression that had made him so effective on television interviews. "Sometimes," he said finally, "the greatest recognition is knowing you did the right thing. Some heroes don't need medals." The soldier nodded solemnly, clearly moved by this wisdom. I left without speaking to him. Drove back to my hotel in silence, watching streetlights blur past the windshield. That night I stared at the ceiling and tried to convince myself that it didn't matter. That recognition was vanity, that the mission's success was what counted, that anonymous service was more pure than public glory. But lying there in the dark, listening to traffic pass outside my window, I realized something that cut deeper than betrayal. Sometimes silence isn't dignity, it's just another form of death. The phone call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. I was in my apartment in Alexandria 3 days back from a surveillance operation in Belgrade, still adjusting to Eastern Standard Time, and the luxury of sleeping in my own bed. "Blake?" I answered without looking at the caller ID muscle memory from 2 decades of middle-of-the-night briefings. "Agent Mitchell is dead." The voice belonged to Commander Hayes, my handler for the past 8 years. No preamble, no softening. Just the kind of direct delivery you use when there's no gentle way to break someone's world. David Mitchell. Call sign, Ghost 7. The closest thing I'd had to a partner in an organization that didn't believe in partnerships. We'd run 14 operations together across 6 countries, saved each other's lives more times than either of us kept count. My voice sounded steady, professional. Nothing like the way my chest was collapsing. "Car accident, outside Munich. Happened fast." I knew better than to ask for details over an unsecured line. Knew better than to ask if it was really an accident. In our line of work, coincidences were rare, and car accidents were convenient. "There will be a memorial service," Hayes continued. "Public. His family requested military honors." David had a family. A wife named Rebecca, 2 daughters I'd seen in photographs but never met. To them, he'd been a diplomatic attaché traveling frequently for boring government work. They knew nothing about Ghost Unit, nothing about the operations that had defined the last 15 years of his life. When and where? Arlington National Cemetery. This Saturday, 2 p.m., full military funeral. I hung up and sat in the dark processing grief I couldn't share with anyone who would understand its depth. David had been the only person in Ghost Unit who'd known about my family situation. During long surveillance shifts, he'd listened to me work through the complicated mathematics of loving people who'd erased you. "They don't know you," he'd said once, watching me stare at a Christmas card from my mother. "They love a ghost version of you that never existed. The question is whether you can live with that." Now he was gone, and I was the only person who knew both versions of David Mitchell, the diplomatic attaché, and the man who'd spent 3 days in a Syrian basement wounded and surrounded, refusing extraction until he could confirm the safety of a local informant's family. 3 days later, another call. This time, the voice was familiar in a way that made my stomach clench. My mother. "Jordan, I hope you're well." The same carefully neutral tone she'd used for years, as if we were distant relatives catching up at a reunion. "Your father and I will be attending a military funeral this Saturday. A colleague of Marcus's was killed overseas." Colleague. As if David had been some fellow officer Marcus had met at a conference. "I wanted to let you know in case you'd like to pay your respects," she continued. "But if you come, please dress appropriately. Don't draw attention to yourself." The line went quiet for a moment. "This is about honoring a fallen soldier, Jordan, not about whatever issues you think you have with this family." I stared at my reflection in the dark window of my apartment. 20 years of classified service, and she still spoke to me like a teenager who might embarrass them at a school function. "I'll be there," I said. "Good, just remember." I hung up before she could finish. Saturday morning, I stood in front of my closet, selecting clothes for David's funeral. My dress uniform hung in the back, crisp and unused since my last official ceremony 15 years ago. The ribbons and decorations told a story I couldn't share, achievements that didn't officially exist. I chose a simple black dress instead. Conservative, respectful, forgettable. The kind of outfit that would let me blend into the crowd of mourners without raising questions about who I was or why I was there. The drive to Arlington took 40 minutes through early spring traffic. Cherry blossoms lined the streets, their pale pink petals drifting across windshields like snow. The world was waking up, coming back to life, while I drove toward another burial. I wasn't going to the funeral for my family. I wasn't going to prove anything or claim recognition or force some dramatic confrontation. I wasn't even going because David would have wanted me there. He'd understood better than anyone why staying invisible was sometimes the safest choice. I was going because David Mitchell had been the only person in 15 years who'd known my real name and my real work, and had never once made me feel like I needed to apologize for either. He'd seen me make impossible decisions in impossible situations and had trusted me completely. He'd known who I really was. In a life built on silence and shadows, that kind of recognition was rarer than medals, more valuable than family approval, more necessary than breath. I wasn't going to speak. I wasn't going to reveal myself or make some grand gesture that would satisfy the part of me that craved acknowledgement. I just wanted to be there, to say goodbye to one of the only people who knew who I really was, and to remember for a few hours what it felt like to be seen. Arlington National Cemetery stretched before me like a city of the dead white headstones, arranged in perfect military precision across rolling green hills. The morning air carried the scent of fresh flowers and old grief, mingling with the distant sound of traffic on Memorial Drive. I arrived early, parking in the visitor lot and walking slowly toward the designated section where David's service would be held. A small crowd had already gathered, maybe 50 people in dark suits and service uniforms, speaking in hushed tones that carry across hallowed ground. My family stood near the front, forming their own cluster of Blake military tradition. My father wore his dress uniform, ribbons catching the morning light. My mother had chosen navy blue, dignified and appropriate. Marcus stood beside them in army dress blues, every inch the decorated officer. Emma was there too, looking sharp in her navy whites, lieutenant's bars gleaming on her collar. They formed a picture-perfect military family, united in their respect for the fallen. I positioned myself at the edge of the crowd, close enough to hear, but far enough to remain unnoticed. Just another mourner paying respects to a soldier she'd never met. At least that's what anyone observing would assume. The ceremony began with military precision. Honor Guard flag presentation, the haunting notes of taps echoing across the cemetery. David's coffin was draped in an American flag surrounded by flowers and photographs from a life his family thought they knew. Rebecca Mitchell stood at the front, flanked by 2 teenage daughters who had their father's dark hair and serious eyes. She clutched a folded flag with white-knuckled hands, accepting condolences from strangers who spoke about David's service to his country. If only they knew the half of it. Marcus stepped forward when invited to speak about his colleague. I watched him approach the small podium, the same confident bearing that had served him so well at the Veterans Day ceremony. David Mitchell was a dedicated servant of this nation. he began, voice carrying easily across the assembled crowd. His work in diplomatic security took him to dangerous places, often under difficult circumstances. Diplomatic security, the cover story the family had been given, sanitized and safe. He believed in protecting others and standing between harm and innocence, Marcus continued. Those of us who served alongside him knew him as a man of unwavering integrity. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from reacting. Marcus had never served alongside David, had never worked a single operation with him, never seen him make the impossible choices that defined real service. But the crowd nodded appreciatively. Rebecca Mitchell's shoulders shook with quiet sobs. The honor guard stood at perfect attention. In his memory, we should all strive to serve with the same dedication, the same selflessness that David brought to his work every day. Applause rippled through the gathering. Respectful, muted, appropriate for the setting. That's when I saw him. An older man in a worn navy peacoat standing apart from the main crowd. Salt and pepper beard, weathered hands, eyes that had seen too much and remembered everything. He was scanning the faces in the crowd with the methodical attention of someone accustomed to surveillance. His gaze stopped on me. I watched recognition dawn in his expression, slow at first, then certain. His eyes widened slightly. He took a step forward, then another, weaving through the crowd toward where I stood. My mother noticed the movement, following his path with her eyes, until she saw what he was walking toward. Her face went pale. She grabbed my father's arm, whispering something urgent in his ear. The man stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the anchor tattoo on his wrist, the deep lines around his eyes that spoke of years at sea and in harm's way. "Excuse me," he said, voice pitched low, but clear enough that nearby mourners turned to look. "Wait. You're the ghost unit survivor." The words hit the air like a physical force. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. The carefully orchestrated dignity of the ceremony fractured along an invisible fault line. I felt every eye in the gathering focus on me. My family's shock was almost visible, my mother's sharp intake of breath, my father's rigid posture, Marcus's face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something approaching panic. Emma took a step toward us, as if she could somehow intervene, somehow maintain the careful fiction that had shaped our family narrative for 20 years. The veteran was waiting for an answer. His expression was respectful, but certain, the look of a man who'd seen enough classified briefings to recognize faces that weren't supposed to exist in public spaces. Behind him, I could see other veterans exchanging glances. Whispered conversations began to spread through the crowd, like ripples in a pond. Someone pulled out a phone. My mother's purse slipped from nerveless fingers, contents scattering across the grass. Lipstick, car keys, a small prayer book landing at her feet, like evidence of a life suddenly called into question. Rebecca Mitchell looked up from her grief, confused by the disturbance during her husband's funeral. Her daughters pressed closer to her side, uncertain about the shift in energy around them. I could have denied it, could have claimed mistaken identity, deflected with confusion or politeness, could have preserved the fiction that had protected my family's version of events for 2 decades. Instead, I looked into the veteran's eyes, eyes that held respect for service, understanding of sacrifice, recognition of truths that couldn't be spoken in normal circumstances. I nodded once. Simple, silent, undeniable. The effect was immediate. The crowd went completely still. Not the respectful quiet of a funeral service, but the absolute silence that follows revelation. The kind of hush that precedes either worship or war. Marcus stepped away from the podium, his prepared remarks forgotten. His face had gone white beneath his tan eyes, wide with the dawning realization that everything he'd believed about his family's military legacy had just shifted beneath his feet. My father stood frozen in place, staring at me as if seeing a stranger wearing his daughter's face. Years of assumptions, of carefully constructed narratives about failure and disappointment crumbling in real time. Emma moved closer, her young face cycling through confusion, understanding, and something that might have been awe. She was the only one who looked at me without shock, as if some part of her had always suspected there was more to the story. The veteran straightened, then raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Ma'am," he said, voice carrying across the silent cemetery. "It's an honor." Several other veterans in the crowd followed suit. Old men with Korea and Vietnam ribbons, middle-aged women who'd served in Desert Storm, young soldiers fresh from Iraq and Afghanistan. all of them saluting a woman in a simple black dress who officially didn't exist. That was the loudest I'd ever been. Without saying a word, Rebecca Mitchell looked between me and the saluting veterans, her grief momentarily displaced by confusion. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I don't understand. Who are you?" I met her eyes across the space that separated widow from ghost, civilian from operator, public grief from private truth. "I was David's partner," I said simply. "In work you never knew about." For the first time in 20 years, I'd told the truth about who I was, and the world hadn't ended. The Marriott in Arlington felt like every other government-rate hotel I'd stayed in over the past 20 years. Beige walls, industrial carpet air that smelled faintly of disinfectant and other people's secrets. I'd checked in under a cover identity, paid cash, requested a room on the 3rd floor with 2 exit routes. Old habits. After David's funeral, I'd driven straight here without speaking to my family. Their faces at the cemetery, shock, confusion, something approaching betrayal, were burned into my memory, like photographs I couldn't delete. 20 years of careful lies had unraveled in 30 seconds, and I wasn't ready to process what that meant. I ordered room service, ate mechanically, while staring out the window at traffic flowing along Jefferson Davis Highway. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that their world contained shadows within shadows. Operators who existed in the gaps between official records. By 9 p.m., I was exhausted in the way that only comes after emotional detonation. I'd changed into sweats and was considering whether I had the energy to shower when I heard something slide across the floor near the door. A phone. Small, black, the kind of burner device used for communication that needed to disappear quickly. It had been slipped under my door so quietly I'd never heard footsteps in the hallway. The screen lit up as I picked it up, displaying a single text message from an unknown number: "Ghosts don't survive the truth. Stay quiet." I stared at the words, feeling ice form in my chest. Someone had been watching. Someone had seen what happened at the cemetery, had tracked me to this hotel, had delivered this warning, with the kind of operational precision that spoke to serious resources. This wasn't some random threat. This was institutional. I powered down the phone and placed it in the room's safe, my hands steadier than I felt. 20 years in Ghost Unit had taught me to manage fear, to think through threats analytically rather than emotionally. But knowing that someone wanted me silenced permanently was different from knowing that someone wanted me invisible. The message was clear: my moment of truth at David's funeral had consequences beyond family drama. Someone viewed my existence as a problem that needed solving. I slept with one eye open and checked out at sunrise. Thomas Garrett lived in a cabin outside Winchester, Virginia, 40 miles from D.C., and a lifetime away from the intelligence community that had shaped us both. He'd been Ghost Unit's communications specialist for 8 years, before a roadside bomb in Pakistan left him with a traumatic brain injury and a medical discharge that officially never happened. I found him where I always did, sitting on his back porch, coffee growing cold in his hands while he watched the sun filter through Virginia pine trees. The explosion had stolen some of his short-term memory, but his understanding of electronic surveillance remained sharp as a blade. "Jordan," he smiled without surprise, as if I visited every week instead of once every 2 years. "Heard you made some noise yesterday." Word traveled fast in our community, even among the officially non-existent. "How much noise?" I settled into the chair beside him, accepting the cup of coffee he poured from a thermal carafe. "Enough that certain people are having conversations they'd prefer not to have." He pulled out a tablet, fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Your name's been flagged in 3 separate databases since yesterday afternoon. Someone's doing deep archive searches, pulling files that haven't been accessed in years." The screen displayed what looked like random code, but I recognized the pattern. Metadata from classified intelligence systems, digital footprints that revealed who was looking for what. This search originated from Defense Intelligence Agency headquarters. Thomas continued, highlighting a section of code. "But the queries are being run through a subcontractor system, private military consulting firm called Meridian Solutions." I knew Meridian. They specialized in cleaning up operational messes, handling problems that couldn't be solved through official channels. If they were digging into my files, someone had authorized a very expensive fishing expedition. What are they looking for? Everything: mission reports, personnel files, financial records. Someone wants a complete picture of Jordan Blake's Ghost Unit service. He paused, studying my face. Question is why now. I thought about the funeral, the veterans' recognition, the ripple effect of truth spoken in a public space. Because I stopped being invisible. Thomas nodded slowly. Ghosts are only useful as long as they stay dead. The moment you prove you're alive, you become a liability. He pulled up another screen, this one showing communication intercepts from the past 12 hours. Phone calls, emails, encrypted messages, all discussing the same topic. There's chatter about operational security breaches, about the need to contain exposure risks. Your family's phones have been monitored since yesterday evening. My mother's terminal access in 2007. Marcus's book filled with details from my classified missions. Now surveillance on their communications. The pattern was becoming clear. They've been watching my family for years, I said. Watching, yes, but also using them. Thomas highlighted another data stream. Your mother's hospital computer was accessed remotely 17 times between 2005 and 2010. Someone was using her credentials to monitor Ghost Unit communications. The Syria mission. The distress signal that was received but never answered. It hadn't been equipment malfunction or bureaucratic oversight. Someone had been using my family as unwitting assets, mining their connections to me for intelligence. Who's running the operation? Thomas's expression darkened. That's where it gets interesting. The queries are being made under authorization codes that trace back to someone inside Ghost Unit, someone with operational command authority. I felt the world tilt slightly, bad enough that private contractors were hunting through my files. Worse, that someone in my own organization was feeding them information. Any idea who? Not yet, but whoever it is has been planning this for a while. The file searches are too precise, too targeted. They know exactly what they're looking for. I stared at the data streams on his screen, trying to process the implications. Someone in Ghost Unit had been monitoring my family, using their civilian lives as leverage against my operational security. Someone had turned my mother into an unwitting intelligence asset, had fed classified information to Marcus, for his book had orchestrated a surveillance network that stretched back years. And now that I'd revealed myself publicly, that same someone had decided I was a problem that needed permanent solving. The burner phone message echoed in my memory. Ghosts don't survive the truth, but ghosts, I was learning, also don't survive silence. Someone had been digging me back up piece by piece, year by year. The only question was whether they planned to bury me again, or just eliminate the need for a grave entirely. The secure terminal at the Defense Intelligence Agency field office in Crystal City hummed quietly as I logged in, using credentials that officially didn't exist. 24 hours had passed since Thomas showed me the surveillance data, and I'd spent most of that time planning an investigation that could end my career or my life. But some truths are worth the risk. My clearance level granted access to archived communication logs, personnel files, and operational databases, spanning 15 years. I started with the Syria mission in 2007, pulling every piece of metadata associated with our compromised distress signal. The digital trail was like reading a story written in code. Our emergency transmission had been received at 0347 hours, routed through standard military communication networks, and delivered to Ghost Unit Command. But there was a secondary access log. Someone had retrieved the message from a different terminal 47 minutes later. Terminal ID, Med 7749 Den. Presbyterian Hospital, Denver, Colorado. My mother's workstation. I pulled her personnel file next, scanning through records I'd never seen before. Marilyn Catherine Blake. Army medic, served 1979-1985. Medical discharge following pregnancy complications. Security clearance level 2, never formally revoked due to administrative oversight. But level 2 clearance shouldn't have granted access to Ghost Unit communications. Those required level 4 authorization minimum with additional compartmentalized access codes, unless someone had been using her credentials as a backdoor. I dug deeper, tracing every instance of her terminal accessing military networks. The pattern that emerged made my stomach clench. Between 2004 and 2012, her workstation had accessed classified databases 73 times. Mission reports, personnel updates, operational summaries, a comprehensive surveillance operation conducted through my mother's unwitting computer. The accessing wasn't random. Each login corresponded to major developments in my career. Failed missions, successful operations, intelligence briefings, threat assessments. Someone had been building a complete psychological profile of my operational effectiveness. And they'd been doing it for years. I pulled communication records next, searching for any contact between my mother's email accounts and external addresses. Most were routine hospital administration, medical conferences, family correspondence. But buried in the metadata was something else. A series of emails to an address registered to Meridian Solutions the private military contractor Thomas had identified. The emails contained no text, just attachments. Small files encrypted sent monthly for 6 years. Someone had been paying my mother to forward classified information. The drive to Denver took 8 hours through mountain passes still dusted with late spring snow. I used the time to process what I'd discovered to prepare for a conversation I'd been avoiding for 20 years. My parents still lived in the same house in Colorado Springs, a modest ranch-style home on a tree-lined street near the Air Force Academy. American flag in the front yard, garden gnomes by the mailbox, the carefully maintained normalcy of military retirement. I knocked instead of using my key. My mother answered, wearing a floral apron flower, dusting her hands. The smell of baking bread drifted from the kitchen, a scene so domestic it felt like mockery given what I'd come to discuss. Jordan. Her voice was carefully neutral, the same tone she'd used since I'd supposedly failed out of West Point. This is unexpected. We need to talk. She studied my face, perhaps recognizing something in my expression that warned against pleasantries. Your father's at his woodworking shop. We have the house to ourselves. I followed her to the kitchen where she busied herself with removing loaves from the oven. The same kitchen where I'd eaten countless meals as a child, where she'd bandaged scraped knees and helped with homework. The normalcy felt surreal. I know about the emails, I said, without preamble. Her hands stilled on the oven mitt. For a long moment, the only sound was the cooling bread crackling in its pans. I don't know what you mean. I pulled out a printed copy of the communication logs, spreading them across her kitchen table like evidence in a courtroom. Terminal access records file, transfers, payment receipts, 20 years of digital betrayal laid bare on gingham placemats. She stared at the papers, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. Surprise, recognition, something that might have been relief. How long have you known? She asked finally. 2 days, but I should have figured it out years ago. I sat across from her, the same chair I'd occupied during countless family dinners. The Syria mission. When our distress signal was ignored, you accessed that message. She nodded slowly, sinking into her own chair. I didn't understand what it meant. I forwarded it like I was supposed to. Supposed to? Who told you to do that? A man from the government. He said you were in danger, that there were people who wanted to hurt you because of your work. He said the only way to protect you was to monitor your communications to make sure you weren't being targeted. The story unfolded in fragments. A phone call in 2003, shortly after I'd disappeared from West Point. Official credentials, references to classified programs she wasn't supposed to know about. The man had explained that her daughter was involved in dangerous work, that enemies might try to use family members to gather intelligence or plan attacks. He said forwarding certain files would help them keep you safe. She continued, voice barely above a whisper. That it was patriotic duty, protecting a valuable asset. What did he look like? Older, military bearing, gray hair, kind eyes. He showed me photographs of you in uniform in places I didn't recognize. Said you were a hero, but that heroes needed protection. Commander Hayes. My handler for 8 years, the man who'd called to tell me about David's death. The man who'd had access to every ghost unit communication, every operational detail, every family connection. Did he pay you? Not exactly. The hospital received donations, equipment upgrades, research grants. He said it was government appreciation for supporting military families. $6 million over 8 years funneled through Meridian Solutions into Presbyterian Hospital's cardiac surgery department. My mother's unwitting cooperation had been purchased with medical equipment that saved civilian lives. Mom, I reached across the table, touching her hand. The Syria mission. When you forwarded that distress signal, my team was under fire. 2 people died because no one responded. Her face crumpled. I didn't know. He said it was just information sharing, interagency coordination. I watched her process the implications, seeing the moment she understood that her maternal protection had enabled the very dangers she'd been trying to prevent. I thought I was keeping you safe, she whispered. When you left West Point, when you disappeared, I was terrified. I didn't understand the person you'd become. The military had changed you into someone I couldn't recognize, couldn't protect. She wiped tears with the back of her hand, leaving flour smudges on her cheeks. He said monitoring your communications would help them anticipate threats. That good intelligence kept soldiers alive. I thought I was being a good mother. I stared at this woman who'd given birth to me, raised me, loved me in the only way she knew how, who'd been manipulated by her own devotion, turned into an intelligence asset through maternal fear. Did you know about Marcus's book about the classified information? No. Her voice was firm. That man stopped contacting me in 2012. Said the program was ending, that you were safe now. I thought it was over. But it hadn't been over. Hayes had simply shifted tactics, using the intelligence my mother had provided to build comprehensive profiles of ghost unit operations. Information that had later been fed to Marcus for his book, to other family members for their own purposes. My mother had been the first domino in a cascade that had nearly destroyed my career and my family. I don't forgive you, I said quietly. She flinched as if I'd struck her. But I understand now. I gathered the papers from the table, evidence of 20 years of manipulation. Sometimes betrayal looks like love, twisted by fear. She nodded, unable to speak. I left her sitting in her kitchen, surrounded by the smell of bread and the weight of unintended consequences. In the driveway, I sat in my car for several minutes, processing the revelation that my own mother had been the source of my operational exposure. But she hadn't been the architect. She'd been a tool wielded by someone who understood exactly how to turn maternal love into operational leverage. Commander Hayes had been playing a longer game than I'd realized, and now it was time to find out why. Sarah Carter lived in a duplex in Tacoma, Washington, 20 minutes from Joint Base Lewis McChord, and a world away from the life she'd planned. I found her address through careful research, cross-referencing public records with personnel files that officially didn't exist. Her husband had been Ghost 12, real name Staff Sergeant Michael Carter. To the Army, he was listed as AWOL, absent without leave, presumed deserter. His service record showed an exemplary soldier who'd simply vanished during a deployment to Afghanistan in 2011. I knew better. Sarah answered the door holding a toddler with Michael's dark eyes and serious expression. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the carefully guarded look of someone who'd learned not to trust visitors bearing official news. Mrs. Carter, my name is Jordan Blake. I served with your husband. Her face shifted through emotions I recognized: hope, fear, resignation. Are you here to tell me he's dead? I'm here to tell you he was a hero. She invited me inside, settling the child in a playpen surrounded by toys that spoke to careful budgeting and fierce love. The living room was sparse, but clean photos of Michael in dress uniform displayed prominently despite his official designation as a deserter. The Army says he ran, Sarah said, pouring coffee with hands that trembled slightly. They say he abandoned his post, maybe defected. They won't tell me anything else. I studied her face, seeing the toll that 7 years of uncertainty had taken. What do you believe? I believe my husband was murdered for doing the right thing. Her voice was steady, matter of fact. I just can't prove it. I pulled out a photograph from my jacket, Michael in tactical gear, standing beside me outside a compound in Kandahar. We both looked exhausted, covered in dust, but alive. It was the last picture taken before everything went wrong. This was 3 days before he died, I said. Sarah's breath caught. She studied the photograph, tracing Michael's face with her finger. You were there, I was his partner. We'd been tracking a high-value target for 6 weeks, a Taliban commander who was coordinating attacks on coalition forces. The mission was going perfectly until we discovered something we weren't supposed to find. The memory came back in fragments. The compound we'd been watching, the intelligence we'd gathered, the moment everything changed, when a drone strike was called in despite our reports that civilians were present. Michael and I had confirmed the target's location in the main building, but there were families in the surrounding structures, women, children, elderly people who had nothing to do with the Taliban. When we reported the civilian presence, we were told to maintain observation and wait for further orders. Sarah leaned forward, hanging on every word. The drone strike came anyway. 20 minutes later, 4 Hellfire missiles turned that compound into a crater. The target was eliminated along with 37 civilians, including 12 children. I paused, remembering the sound of the explosions, the smoke rising from what had been a neighborhood. Michael couldn't accept it. He'd been watching those families for weeks, had seen the children playing in the courtyard. When he tried to file a formal complaint about the civilian casualties, he was told the mission was classified and the casualties were regrettable but necessary. So he went public. He tried to. He gathered evidence, documented the civilian deaths, prepared a comprehensive report for the Inspector General's office. But before he could submit it, he was transferred to a remote outpost and ordered to maintain radio silence. Sarah's face had gone pale. They silenced him. They tried to, but Michael was stubborn. He found another way to get the story out, contacted a journalist through encrypted channels, arranged to meet him with copies of all the evidence. I reached into my jacket again this time, pulling out an envelope sealed with wax. Michael's handwriting across the front, for Jordan Blake. If something happens. He gave me this the night before he was supposed to meet the journalist. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure someone knew the truth. Sarah took the envelope with shaking hands, breaking the seal carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered with Michael's precise handwriting. Jordan. If you're reading this, then Hayes got to me before I could expose what happened in Kandahar. The drone strike was deliberate. They knew about the civilians and ordered the strike anyway, because the target was more valuable than 37 innocent lives. I have proof, communications, satellite imagery, witness statements. But if I disappear, the evidence disappears too. Don't let them bury this. Don't let those children become statistics in some classified file. If we disappear, make sure someone remembers us, even if it's just one name. Sarah read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. He didn't run. He didn't run. 3 days after he wrote that letter, his patrol was ambushed by Taliban fighters who knew exactly where to find them. Only Michael was killed. The others survived to report that he'd been separated from the group during the firefight. But you know different. I know he was executed, not by the Taliban, but by someone who wanted to ensure his evidence never saw daylight. And I know that his death was officially recorded as AWOL, to discredit anything he might have prepared beforehand. Sarah clutched the letter to her chest, finally having confirmation of what she'd suspected for 7 years. Her husband hadn't been a coward or a traitor. He'd been murdered for refusing to stay silent about war crimes. What happened to the evidence destroyed? His personal effects were lost in transit. His computer was wiped clean. Everything he'd gathered was eliminated along with him. She looked at the photograph again, seeing her husband as he really was, a soldier who died for trying to save children he'd never met. "Thank you," she whispered, "for telling me the truth." I stood to leave, but she stopped me at the door. "The letter mentions Commander Hayes. Is he?" "He's the reason I'm here," I said. "And he's the reason your husband is dead." I sent the invitations by text. No long explanations, no emotional appeals. Just an address and a time dinner. Saturday, 6 p.m. Come alone. The restaurant was a quiet place in downtown Denver, the kind of establishment that catered to business dinners and difficult conversations. I'd reserved a corner table, 4 chairs arranged around white linen and polished silverware, far enough from other diners to ensure privacy, close enough to the exit that anyone could leave if they needed to. I arrived first, ordering a glass of water and spreading the manila folder across my placemat like a menu. 20 years of classified service reduced to paper and ink mission reports, with my signature commendations that had never been publicly awarded, photographs from operations that officially didn't exist. My father appeared in the doorway at exactly 6 o'clock, scanning the dining room with the methodical attention of someone accustomed to assessing tactical situations. He wore slacks and a button-down shirt, but his posture remained military straight as he approached the table. Marcus arrived 2 minutes later, followed by my mother. They looked uncertain, off balance, in a way I'd never seen before. The confident family dynamic that had defined every previous gathering had fractured at David's funeral, leaving them unsure of their roles in whatever scene was about to unfold. "Jordan." My father took the seat across from me, eyes immediately drawn to the folder. "Thank you for the invitation." My mother chose the chair to my left, her hands folded carefully in her lap. Marcus sat beside her, still processing the implications of what he'd learned about his sister's actual service record. I didn't offer small talk. We were past that now. "I invited you here to show you something," I said, opening the folder and spreading documents across the table. This is who I've been for the past 20 years. The first document was a mission summary from Syria 2007. Operation Candlestrike. My name was redacted in most places, but my signature was clearly visible at the bottom of the after-action report. Details about the civilian rescue, the tactical decisions, the team members we'd lost. My father leaned forward, studying the paper with growing recognition. This is the operation Marcus wrote about, in his book. Chapter 7. I confirmed. The mission that saved 37 civilians and cost us 2 good soldiers. Marcus had gone pale. I didn't know. The report I saw had all the names blacked out. I never imagined. I spread out more documents. Commendations for operations in Afghanistan, Turkey, Pakistan. Intelligence assessments bearing my analysis. Photographs from mission briefings, where I was the only woman in rooms full of generals and spooks. This is from the refugee camp evacuation you spoke about at the Veterans Day ceremony, I said, pointing to a specific report. 317 civilians moved to safety in 8 hours, 0 casualties. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. My mother reached out to touch one of the photographs, me in tactical gear, standing beside David Mitchell outside a compound in Kandahar. You were there, she whispered. All those years when you thought I'd failed. When you told people I couldn't handle military life, I kept my voice level factual. I was running black operations across 3 continents, preventing terrorist attacks, saving lives that will never be publicly acknowledged. My father studied each document methodically, his expressions cycling through disbelief, recognition, and something approaching awe. The ghost unit. I've heard rumors, but I thought they were just intelligence community legend. We're real. We're just not supposed to exist. I pulled out the final piece of evidence, a photograph of myself receiving a classified commendation from the Secretary of Defense. My dress uniform bore ribbons and decorations that told a story of courage under fire, exceptional service sacrifice that went beyond normal duty. This was taken 6 months ago, I said, after the operation that finally led to Osama bin Laden's location. I provided the intelligence that made that mission possible. The words hung in the air like smoke. 20 years of invisible service finally given form and weight. My mother's voice was barely audible. Why didn't you ever tell us? I met her eyes, seeing genuine confusion alongside the tears. Because you never asked. And if I had, I don't think you would have believed me. It was the truth we'd all been avoiding. The family narrative had been easier than reality, the daughter who couldn't measure up, who'd walked away from the military tradition that defined their identity. Admitting I'd actually succeeded beyond their wildest imagination would have required acknowledging how completely they'd misunderstood me. You let us think, Marcus started, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. I let you think what you needed to think. It was easier for everyone involved. My father reached across the table, his weathered hand covering mine. We owe you an apology. No. I pulled my hand back gently. Apologies require admitting fault, and you weren't wrong to believe what you were told. You were manipulated just like I was. I began gathering the documents, returning them to the folder with careful precision. I didn't bring you here for apologies or explanations. I brought you here so you could see the truth with your own eyes. I stood, placing the folder under my arm. I'm not asking for love. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for recognition. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation around us, normal families sharing normal meals, unaware of the moment of reckoning happening at our corner table. I'm your daughter, I continued. I've served my country with honor for 20 years. I've saved lives, prevented attacks, and paid prices you'll never fully understand. That's who I am. That's who I've always been. My mother wiped tears from her cheeks. We're proud of you. We've always been proud. No, I said quietly. You've been proud of the idea of me. Tonight is the first time you're meeting the actual person. I left them sitting at that table, processing the gap between who they'd thought I was and who I'd actually become. It wasn't cruelty that drove me to walk away. It was the recognition that some revelations require solitude to fully comprehend. For the first time in 20 years, I'd shown my family exactly who Jordan Blake really was. Whether they could learn to love that person remained to be seen. The lecture hall at the War College smelled like fresh paint and old ambitions. 43 of the military's brightest rising stars sat in tiered rows, notebooks open ready to absorb lessons about asymmetric warfare in the 21st century. Most were majors and lieutenant colonels, seasoned officers who'd commanded troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, but had never operated in the shadows between official policy and necessary action. I stood at the front of the classroom in civilian clothes, navy blazer, simple slacks, nothing that advertised rank or affiliation. The nameplate on the podium read Professor Blake, a title that felt strange after 2 decades of existing without one. Today we're discussing operational flexibility in hostile environments. I began clicking to the first slide of my presentation, specifically how to accomplish mission objectives when traditional command structures become liabilities. 6 months had passed since the family dinner in Denver. 6 months since Commander Hayes had been quietly arrested for running an illegal surveillance operation that had compromised multiple Ghost Unit operatives. 6 months since I'd officially transitioned from active duty to this strange new role, teaching the next generation of military leaders about wars they couldn't fight with conventional tactics. The lecture covered ground that felt both familiar and foreign: strategic deception, cultural infiltration, the psychological toll of long-term isolation from support networks. I spoke about operations without naming them, shared tactical insights without revealing sources, discussed the human cost of asymmetric warfare without mentioning the specific friends I'd lost. After class, most students filed out quickly, eager to reach the dining hall before the lunch crowd arrived. But one remained: Captain Erica Williams, a West Point graduate with tours in Afghanistan and Syria, who'd consistently asked the most challenging questions during each session. Professor Blake. She approached the podium with the careful confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. Could I ask you something off the record? I gathered my notes, buying time to assess her intent. Depends on the question. The operations you described, the deep cover missions, the autonomous decision-making protocols, they sound like Ghost Unit tactics. I kept my expression neutral. That's not a question. Were you Ghost? The directness caught me off guard. Most people danced around the subject, approaching classified topics through inference and implication. Erica Williams had the courage to ask what others only wondered. Why do you want to know? Because I've been selected for advanced intelligence training, deep cover operations, extended deployments with minimal command contact, the kind of work that doesn't officially exist. She paused, studying my face for reaction. I want to understand what I'm signing up for. I looked at this young woman, maybe 28, brilliant, driven, standing at the same crossroads I'd faced 20 years earlier. The decision to disappear, to become someone else in service of missions that would never be acknowledged. Walk with me, I said. We left the lecture hall and wandered across the academy grounds, past manicured lawns, where cadets practiced drill formations, and memorial gardens, dedicated to graduates who died in service. The spring air carried the sound of distant training exercises, the rhythmic cadence of soldiers learning to move as one. Ghost Unit isn't what you think it is, I said finally. People imagine us as shadows, as mystical operators who slip between worlds without consequence. But we weren't shadows, we were just made that way. Erica walked beside me in silence, processing the implications. The missions are real, the importance is real, the necessity is real. I stopped beside a memorial wall listing names of academy graduates killed in action. But the cost is higher than anyone tells you during recruitment. What kind of cost? You disappear, not just from enemy sight, but from everything. Family, friends, identity, future. You become a tool for accomplishing objectives that can't be achieved through official channels. And when those objectives are completed, you're expected to vanish again until the next impossible task arrives. I traced one of the names carved into the black granite, a classmate from my own West Point days, who died in a helicopter crash in Iraq. A public death with ceremony and recognition, and family members who knew exactly why he'd sacrificed his life. The hardest part isn't the danger, I continued. It's the invisibility, watching other people receive credit for your work, listening to your own family assume you failed, sitting in silence while history gets written without your name. Erica absorbed this, her ambitious expression tempered by growing understanding. Why did you do it? Because the missions mattered. Because people lived who would have died otherwise. Because someone had to make the hard choices in the dark places where policy meets reality. We continued walking past training facilities and administrative buildings, through a world dedicated to preparing soldiers for conventional warfare. But both of us knew that the most important battles happened in spaces between official doctrine and necessary action. "Captain Williams," I said as we approached the parking area, "if you accept advanced intelligence training, you'll face decisions that aren't covered in any manual. You'll be asked to sacrifice parts of yourself for objectives you can't discuss with anyone who would understand their importance." She nodded, still processing. A young cadet once asked me, "In war, what's the hardest part?" I told her the truth: surviving without turning your wounds into weapons. I stopped beside my car keys, all ready in hand. "The choice is yours, but understand that once you disappear, coming back requires more courage than leaving ever did." Erica Williams saluted, crisp, professional, respectful. "Thank you for the honesty, ma'am." I returned the salute, seeing my younger self in her determined expression. "Good luck, Captain, whatever you decide." As I drove away from the academy, I wondered if I'd given her enough information to make an informed choice, or if some decisions could only be understood in retrospect. Either way, the next generation of ghost operators would face the same impossible mathematics I'd wrestled with for 20 years. The balance between service and sacrifice, between duty and identity, between the missions that matter and the life that remains when they're finished. 3 weeks after my conversation with Captain Williams, I was grading final exams in my office when someone knocked on the door. Soft, measured taps that suggested military discipline rather than student urgency. "Come in." The woman who entered wore a simple black uniform without insignia, rank, or unit identification. Mid-40s, graying hair pulled back in a regulation bun, eyes that had seen enough classified briefings to recognize the weight of secrets. She moved with the controlled precision of someone accustomed to operating in spaces where mistakes had permanent consequences. "Professor Blake." She closed the door behind her and remained standing. "Thank you for seeing me." I set down my red pen and studied her face, searching for clues about her affiliation. Defense Intelligence Agency, maybe, or one of the alphabet soup organizations that existed in the margins between official policy and necessary action. I don't recall scheduling an appointment. This conversation isn't on any calendar. She approached my desk, hands clasped behind her back in a parade rest position that spoke to years of military bearing. "I represent certain interested parties who've been following your transition to academic life." The phrasing was careful, diplomatic, designed to convey authority without revealing specifics. Standard intelligence community vernacular for conversations that couldn't be documented. "What do you want to offer you an opportunity?" She pulled a sealed envelope from her jacket, placing it on my desk with the same precision she'd shown in closing the door. "The world has changed since you left active duty. New threats, new challenges, new requirements for people with your particular skill set." I stared at the envelope without touching it. "I'm retired." "You're teaching." She smiled, the expression containing equal parts respect and recruitment. "Sharing hard-won wisdom with the next generation of officers. Noble work, necessary work, but limited in scope." The silence stretched between us while I processed the implications. Another invitation to disappear, to become someone else in service of objectives I couldn't discuss. More years of invisibility, more missions that would remain classified long after I was dead. "What makes you think I'm interested?" "Because 3 weeks ago, you told Captain Williams that surviving war meant not turning wounds into weapons. But you didn't tell her the corollary, that some wounds can only heal through purpose." The observation was accurate enough to be unsettling. Someone had been monitoring my classes, analyzing my conversations, building a psychological profile based on off-the-record discussions with students. "The work we're offering isn't about war," she continued. "It's about truth. About ensuring that certain stories get told, that certain sacrifices receive recognition, that certain injustices don't remain buried in classified files." I thought about David Mitchell, whose real heroism had been hidden behind a diplomatic cover story. About Michael Carter, whose courage had been rewritten as desertion. About all the ghost unit operators whose names would never appear on memorial walls because their existence had been officially denied. Who would I be working for? People who understand that transparency and national security aren't mutually exclusive. People who believe that democracy requires informed citizens, not just classified operations. She turned toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "The envelope contains details, contact information, and a timeline for response. Take your time with the decision, but understand that some opportunities don't repeat themselves. After she left, I sat alone in my office staring at the envelope. 20 years of serving in shadows of accomplishing objectives that couldn't be acknowledged, of watching other people receive credit for work I'd done in silence. But this invitation was different. Not a call to disappear, but a chance to help others become visible. To ensure that the stories of people like David and Michael didn't remain buried in files that would never see daylight. I picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of whatever decision waited inside. Outside my window, cadets were practicing drill formations on the parade ground, learning to move as one unit toward objectives they could see clearly. Clean, simple, officially sanctioned. I opened the envelope and began to read. For the first time in months, I smiled. If you've ever felt erased, unheard, or mistaken for someone you're not, drop a comment below. I see you, and your story matters. And if this story found you, please subscribe, because sometimes just being heard is its own kind of justice.